Welcome to another edition of Daily Airline News, focusing on the search for MH370. I'm Jeffrey Thomas, and I'm delighted to say once again joined by my co-host in Germany, Richard Godfrey. Good morning, Richard.
And good afternoon, Jeffrey.
So today we're going to answer your questions from the plane guys, the shoot down of KA007 and MH17. And there's been quite a few. But before we get into those shoot down questions, an interesting stat for you. Since 1950, there's been 15 air-to-air shoot downs of commercial airliners and 39 surface-to-air shoot down of commercial airliners. So sadly, it's not a rare event. It does happen. So fortunately, not typically on major commercial air routes, but it does happen. Dinosaurus 5406, you didn't mention who was responsible for the MH17 shoot down. Kind of important, don't you think?
Yes, we do
Yes.
think. And in announcing the episode on KE007 and MH17 on Saturday, we said, tomorrow, and I quote, we are going to be looking at KE007, which was shot down by the Russians. No argument about that. And MH17, that was also shot down by the Russians. No argument about that either. Unquote. We have previously mentioned several times that on the 12th of May 2025, the ICAO Council concluded that the Russian Federation was responsible for the 2014 downing of Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 over eastern Ukraine, resulting in the deaths of all 298 people on board. And this determination by ICAO marks the first time in their history that its council has ruled on the merits of a dispute between member states and its dispute settlement mechanism. The council found that Russia violated Article 3 bis. That's an additional article added to the convention, the so-called Chicago Convention, which prohibits the use of weapons against civil aircraft in flight. The pretty clear, really. The decision was based on claims brought by Australia and the Netherlands, who initiated proceedings in 2022 following a Dutch-led investigation that concluded a Russian-supplied Buk missile fired from separatist-held Ukrainian territory destroyed the aircraft. So I think we've been very clear in our statements. And yesterday we again said the Russian Buk missile was found and identified. We talked about the mobile rocket launcher, which was tracked, and we talked about the Bellingcat investigation on that. So don't know how you come to the conclusion, Dinosaurus, that we didn't mention it.
Yeah, we sure did.
Jeffrey, you were in the UK covering the Farnborough Air Show on the 17th of July 2014, and I think on your way to Paris in France when you heard about MH17. Can you tell us about that?
Well, yes. It's I was sort of in transit. We had been covering the Farnborough Air Show, the 2014 Farnborough Air Show, and we were on the Eurostar going to Paris. And Christine said to me, what can disrupt our holiday? Because we're going to spend a week in France on holiday, and the previous few months had been very disruptive because of the MH370 tragedy. And I simply said to her, another crash would do it. And we were going out that night on the Seine, on the riverboat, have dinner. And so we decided when we got to Paris to have a rest. And while having a rest, the phone rang, and it was Channel 7 in Australia. And the first thing they said to me is, "You're not going to believe what's just happened." And I said, "What?" And I was half groggy. And they said, "Another Malaysian Airlines 777 has come down." And instead of going out on the riverboat, I spent then 7 hours in the studio in Paris covering this terrible tragedy live into Australia. And I particularly remember the compere, Koshi, we called him. He said to me, there won't be any Australians on board, will there? And I said, "Well, yes, there will be." And he said, "Well, how many?" And I said, "Well, at least 20 or so." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, the flight was from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur, but there at the hub at Kuala Lumpur, it would connect with flights to Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, and Perth." And there was sort of a chilled silence as the reality of that sank in. And as the evening went on in Paris, the number kept climbing. And I think it ended up about 36 Australians were on board that flight that was down. So it was a very chilling and sobering night to be covering this terrible, terrible air crash.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I think one of the viewers made you aware of a family in Victoria that were lost.
Yes, a colleague of mine, of one of our aviation colleagues, Michael, he said, "I live down the road from one of the families," and I won't mention their names, a mother and father and three children. He was Dutch, she was Australian, and they were visiting his relatives in Holland, and returning. And their home is just down the road from my colleague. And he said that home has stayed unoccupied ever since. Somebody, I don't know who, tends the garden and looks after it, but it has been vacant now since 2014. And like a memorial to the family. So very, my friend Michael says, it's very chilling, and I drive past it all the time, and to think that that family's gone. So yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
indeed, a chilling story.
mm. So Henry Planner, if I remember well, KAL007 tragedy sped up the GPS program, at least to be opened up to the public and not only the militaries to a certain degree. And in Perfect Stranger, the commander of the Buck missile crew boasted on social media that they had just shot down a Ukrainian aircraft, and then he immediately deleted his message when he realized it was a commercial airliner that had been shot down. Fortunately, the original message was saved by someone, yet the Russians still deny it.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. And yeah, the Russians still deny it to this day. In Holland, they instituted criminal proceedings against four different people. A guy called Igor Gherkin, also known as Igor Strelkov, who was a former Russian intelligence officer and the defense minister of the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic at the time of the incident. The second was Sergei Dubinsky, a former officer of the Russian military intelligence agency, GRU, who was allegedly involved in coordinating the transport of the Buck missile system used to shoot down MH17. And against Leonid Karchenko, a Ukrainian national and commander of a DPR combat unit accused of playing a role in the transportation and security of the missile launcher, and Oleg Pulatov, a former Russian GRU officer and deputy head of intelligence for the DPR. And he was the only defendant who was legally represented in court by defense lawyers, and the only one who was acquitted. The others were sentenced to life imprisonment in their absence.
Yeah. Ian, 1959. Hi, Plane Guys. Another great episode. Thanks. I thought one of the biggest changes after KA007 disaster was the then President Reagan ordering the US military to make GPS available to everyone. Is this correct? Thank you. Which that could have goes with Henry Planner's comment as well.
Indeed. And yeah, you're both correct. In 1983, aircraft did not have GPS systems. The US Department of Defense developed and launched a GPS satellite constellation. It became fully operational in 1993, so 10 years later, and the FAA in the US began certifying GPS receivers for use in aircraft for supplemental navigation. And that started in 1994. So you're quite correct. That was ordered by President Reagan, but it took a while to come into force. The Boeing 747 230B registration HL7442, the Korean 007 flight, had several navigation systems on board, and it gets a little bit complicated. So the prime system was a Delco Carousel 4 inertial navigation system, INS. This system uses gyroscopes and accelerometers to calculate the aircraft's position, and it does that very accurately, and it allows you to program a flight route with waypoints, and it doesn't rely on any external signals to know where it is. We're showing you a screenshot of the cockpit panel for this system. It also had a VOR DME system, an automatic direction finder, a non-directional beacon system, and it had a magnetic compass, a flux gate system compass, and a gyro compass, which was a directional gyro. So following a constant magnetic heading of 245 degrees magnetic was not an issue, but that was not what was supposed to happen. Flight was supposed to follow the waypoints in the flight plan, and that didn't happen for some reason. That is a pilot error. And after 290 minutes of flying time and covering over 2,442 nautical miles, the aircraft was at least 92 nautical miles out compared with the IGRF magnetic declination model dated 1st of September 1983. And in fact, according to the ICAO report, was 319 nautical miles or 590 kilometers off the planned flight route. We're showing you a screenshot with a sky vector of the 245-degree magnetic flight path, and KE007 followed this all the way. The Sperry C14 compass system on board has an accuracy of around plus minus 2%, and the worst case would be plus minus 5 degrees. Sorry, I should have said 2 degrees and 5 degrees, not percent. It was designed as a backup system to the INS. And the INS, as I said, was very accurate. The backup compass systems were not so accurate. And for some unknown reason, the INS did not capture the flight path when it was switched on. It was probably switched on too late and probably more than 7.5 nautical miles off course, or it wasn't switched on at all, and the magnetic heading setting was kept for the whole flight. And another thing you need to know is the magnetic declination or variation on the 1st of September 1983 ranged between 25.05 degrees east at Anchorage International Airport to 9.39 degrees west at the crash location. So just doing the flight on a magnetic heading is very difficult to handle. And we're showing you another screenshot of the crash location, which is just 20 nautical miles short of the Fukuoka flight information region in Japan. And my view, the aircraft was not posing a threat. It was just about to go back into Japanese airspace. And it is interesting that when the ICAO reopened its investigation in 1993, when the Russians finally gave them the CVR and FDR tapes, the ICAO never published a detailed analysis of the CVR and FDR data. So we don't know exactly the crash location, and we have to just take the Russian word for that, which is not the usual way in a crash investigation. And the ICAO said they are not an investigation authority. They just wanted to check the conclusions of the original investigation hadn't changed. They didn't want to do a full re-investigation. And the tapes were seen as a political gesture by Russia, and ICAO didn't want to reopen old wounds. But there were gaps and ambiguities in the recordings, which raised the concern whether the data had been altered. So, all in all, we're still in the dark on KE007.
Yeah, very much so. And people, a lot of our listeners, viewers, I should say, and listeners, are asking lots of questions about that particular aspect of what we don't know. Scott Crawford, 4148. I recall the news at the time of the Korean air disaster. There was speculation that the RC-135 was shadowing the commercial jet to mask its movement in Russian airspace.
Yeah, Scott, the US admitted that there was a RC-135 in the vicinity of KE007 2 hours before the incident. And it said it was always around 500 kilometers from the crash location. So there is no confirmation either from the Russian radar or the US radar that KE007 was being used as a radar shield. The same accusation has been made on MH17, by the way, that the Ukrainian Air Force were using MH17 and other commercial aircraft as a radar shield. And there was an attempt to shoot down a Ukrainian aircraft, but they missed and got MH17 instead. But these stories have not been confirmed with radar evidence or other positive evidence. They are still in the realm of speculation.
So Joseph Brown, hyphen Hotel Mike 9 Hotel Kilo, questions re 007. Is there any info on why there was no effective communication between the plane and the Soviets, either on the ground or with the attacking plane? Was any sort of challenge made? Did KA007 hear any challenge? And if so, why did they presumably ignore it?
There was an attempt at radio communication, but the Russians assumed that this was an RC-135 So they were probably on military frequencies and not on civilian frequencies. The pilot who shot down KE007 confirms that there was no positive identification of the aircraft type. He said he saw a silhouette, but whether it was an RC-135 or a Boeing 747, he couldn't say. I think he did finally admit that he saw windows with lights along the aircraft, which would make it a Boeing 747 or at least a commercial airliner, because the RC-135 does not have windows, which would be lit up along the fuselage.
Just Dave, 3759. Thank you, gents. I've been in hospital for several days and your videos have supplied some invaluable mental distraction.
Well, that's what we're all about, isn't it? Mental distraction. And we wish you, Dave, get well soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Get well soon. Take care. So, Dan, November Tango 2 Yankee Bravo. Another fine presentation, gentlemen, on two very tragic occurrences. In the case of KA007, the Russian fighter pilot was fully aware that it was a civilian aircraft, but still assumed it was on a spy mission because who in the world would dare fly in this region, etc. This all beggars the question, why in the world did three highly experienced members of the KAL flight crew never notice they were so far off their proper waypoints, and why did Flight Command on the ground not question what they were doing? As tragic as this was, it was at the height of the Cold War and tensions were very high, a truly different world. Well, I think it's a bit like that now, but that's from Dan in Victoria, Canada.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Dan. You're quite correct. Major Gennady Osipovich did report seeing lights, but said there was not enough detail to clearly distinguish the aircraft as a civilian Boeing 747 and not a military reconnaissance aircraft like the RC-135. So, yes, this was a pilot error by the Korean pilots. It was in the midst of Cold War paranoia. It was also a misidentification and a set of communication failures, and all of that wrapped into a tragedy. So, hence the very strict rules brought in by the ICAO subsequently to how to intercept, how to positively identify, and what to do if a unresponsive flight is just diverting from its flight plan, and how you force that aircraft to land at a nearby airport and try to solve what's going on.
Yeah. So, Jet City Rascal 69. What if the loaded passenger plane does not respond to the various signals? What is the procedure for a non-responsive plane, and a middle finger from whoever is in control?
Yeah, well, it starts to get exciting, Jet City Rascal. You start firing flares, which sort of implies you're upset that there was a middle finger raised. And then you get in front of the aircraft at a safe distance and start rocking your wings violently. Or at night, you flash your lights on and off, or you even put your afterburners on. So you really make it clear that you are asking the plane to follow you to a landing and a forced landing. And you keep at it until the aircraft complies.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Richard from Bob Deverell, don't forget IR 655 was shot down by the USS Vincennes over the Persian Gulf with all lost.
Iran Air Flight 655 was a scheduled passenger flight from Tehran to Dubai, operated by an Airbus A300. And on the 3rd of July 1988, shortly after departing from a stopover in Bandar Abbas, the aircraft was shot down by two surface-to-air missiles fired from the U.S. Vincennes, a U.S. Navy guided missile cruiser in the Strait of Hormuz. And all 290 people on board, 274 passengers and 16 crew were killed. And this makes it one of the deadliest airliner shoot-downs in history. In 1989, Iran filed a case against the United States in the International Court of Justice, alleging violations of international aviation law. The case was discontinued in 1996 following a settlement where the US agreed to pay $61.8 million in compensation to victims' families, but they did not admit legal liability.
Yeah, that was another great tragedy and sort of segues back to the numbers of aircraft that have been shot down over the years. Yeah, terrible misidentification. I think there was some confusion. I think the Americans warned them about 3 times, but there was a confusion about the radio frequency that they were on because they never responded. So, yeah, very
Yeah.
great tragedy. Yeah.
And these events often happen with a combination of misidentification and miscommunication and suspicion and sometimes even paranoia.
Mm, yeah, indeed. So, viewers, that's all we have time for today. Now, we're going to be back tomorrow with a fascinating episode about Whisper. And this is off the back of Richard's special broadcast to the Canadians, I think it was, wasn't it? Amateur Radio Society.
Yeah, there was a Zoom call for over an hour with a radio amateur club in on Vancouver Island in Canada, and we recorded that. So we're going to talk about what we discussed on Whisper, and we're going to give you a link to the recording. So those of you who want a 1 hour episode will finally get one.
Yes, as well as the half-hour episode of us explaining what it's all about. So
Indeed.
you'll be whispered out by the time you've watched the hour and a half. No,
In,
that'll be a really fascinating one. And also this week, we're going to be looking at the FBI's involvement with MH370, Richard, and the flight simulator. Is that correct?
yeah, well, we're going to do the one with the Radio Amateur Club, and then we're going to do one with on the opponents of Whisper. So we give them their voice of what they
Yes.
think is wrong with using Whisper to try and detect and track aircraft. And we're also going to talk about the FBI and their involvement in helping Malaysia and ATSB with the home flight simulator from Captain Zahari Shah and uncovering what that tells us and what it does not tell us.
Mm. And also, we're going to have Blaine back this week with some more debris as well, which is fascinating. So it's going to be a really interesting week for those interested in all things aviation and all things MH370.
A lot happening.
Yeah, indeed. So look, Richard, thank you so much for your time and work on these questions today. Viewers, please subscribe to us. Please like us. Please keep those comments coming. And also, if you've got some particular subject that you'd like us to cover on MH370 or on aviation in general, drop us a line. Let us know either in the comments or email us directly. So viewers, thank you again for tuning in. Please subscribe to us. Please like us. Please keep those comments coming. And please do tune in tomorrow. when we discuss Whisper. And thank you, Richard.
You're welcome.